The Charlie Brown specials are always something I've resonated with. Charlie Brown being incredibly down on himself and self-conscious is something that I always find interesting and relatable when I watch all of the specials. And I couldn't help but think of Charlie Brown the other day when me and my friend had this conversation about regret and trying to live life without it. Because I don't think that's something I can put on myself in terms of I acknowledge that I'm going to have regrets and things I think I messed up. In A Boy Named Charlie Brown, the whole special is about Charlie Brown feeling down on himself until finally something goes his way, which happens to be the school spelling bee. Actually, to take a step back, I want to talk about Lucy, who I think is such a good character in general because I think her character being such a big part in Charlie Brown's life is so specific to being a kid. There's this scene at the beginning of the special where Charlie Brown goes to her for help, which is obviously to the audience a bad idea because Lucy does nothing but drag Charlie Brown all the time, but I think this is very normal for kids to go through stuff like this, where supposed friends or people who you think are on your side really aren't. Lucy ends up showing Charlie Brown a slideshow of all his faults or embarrassing moments he's had, and he can't bear to watch. I think kids stressing over stuff like this is overlooked for whatever reason. At least for me, I can remember at a super young age just generally being self-conscious and nervous, and I feel like it's something that people assume young kids don't experience for whatever reason. Back to the spelling bee though, Charlie Brown ends up winning his school spelling bee, which is super rewarding at first and feels like him not giving up is finally paying off. He feels good for a bit and then realizes that he actually has to go compete at the state spelling bee representing his school, which turns him into an absolute nervous wreck. Charlie Brown is the type of person that doesn't want any eyes on him, so this spelling bee is a huge challenge for him. And the main thing that drives him is the fear of messing up or letting everyone down and the fear of embarrassment. Which I completely understand. I remember when I was in elementary school, there was this obstacle course thing our school would do every year where a couple kids would represent their grade and race a bunch of other kids from other grades in front of the whole school. And I remember my gym teacher every year trying to convince me to participate, and it just sounded awful to me and I never wanted to because I never wanted all those eyes on me. This fear of messing up ends up driving Charlie Brown to work really hard studying for the spelling bee though, and he does really well. He makes it all the way to the end and then messes up the word beagle, which is super embarrassing for him because that's the type of dog Snoopy is. And everyone back home is watching and is super pissed off at him for some reason, and Charlie Brown comes home and is just super depressed and lays in bed all day. And this is where Linus comes in, who is typically the voice of reason in Charlie Brown's life. Linus basically tells Charlie Brown that even though he feels like he messed up, the world keeps spinning, and that not much has actually changed. And this ends up working. Charlie Brown gets up and walks around the neighborhood and realizes that Linus is right. I guess what Linus is trying to communicate here is just that Charlie Brown's failures aren't the end of the world, which I feel like is kind of the only way to try and deal with stuff that you can't change but you feel badly about. But me thinking about all this in the first place came from that conversation with my friend about regret and how to live with it, or if it's okay to live with. And we were talking about it in the context of romantic relationships and the regret that can stem from that, which led me back to another Charlie Brown special. The special I'm talking about is You're in Love, Charlie Brown. The whole plot of this special revolves around Charlie Brown trying to gain the courage to talk to the little red-haired girl. And the reason this special came to mind is because not knowing what you want came up in this conversation with my friend, which I think applies to this special and Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown does know he wants to be happy, but the whole problem with pretty much every special is that he's doing a really bad job of that. And I think that's what drives him insane in this one. The thought of, what if I do talk to this girl and everything goes well and I still feel awful? And then, on top of this, Charlie Brown is already such a sad and depressed person that just the thought of rejection is enough to break him. I think this applies to people and regret in general because the more you have going for you, the easier the idea of living with regret is. Here, Charlie Brown's self-doubt and depression make it impossible for him to win the internal battle he has with himself throughout the whole special. I also want to touch on Linus as a character, because he's always portrayed as the reasonable one or the most level-headed person in Charlie Brown's life. And Linus helps Charlie Brown through a bunch of stuff all the time and is definitely his best friend in all the specials, but I feel like the Halloween special ends up humanizing him. So, for some context in the Halloween special, Linus thinks that this mythical figure that he calls the Great Pumpkin is gonna come to this pumpkin patch in his neighborhood. and he waits, and Sally, Charlie Brown's little sister, ends up waiting with him so they can see the Great Pumpkin, and he ends up never coming. And the reason I like this special and am pointing it out is because it ends up humanizing Linus, just in terms of showing that even the best people are still flawed and are still people. And in this case, it just goes to show that even though Linus is level-headed, at the end of the day, he's still a kid, and he's still gonna make mistakes, and he's still gonna mess up. This conversation that me and my friend had about regret and romantic love all started because we watched the movie Her, which is a movie about this guy who is recently divorced and ends up falling in love with an AI. And it's funny because that has nothing to do with Charlie Brown, but the discussion that we had just made me think of it. And I guess all roads always lead back to animation for me, because I just know these shows and cartoons or whatever so well. Anyways, I'm done for now. I'd like to, at some point, go more in depth and make a longer video on these specials, because I really like them, and it's just cool to revisit them whenever I can. So yeah, that's it. See ya.